Okay, folks. Okay, thank you.
Did you find four? Oh my god, you were smarter than me.
Hey, Josh.
Thanks, Joe. Morning, afternoon, evening. It's raining in New York, so folks here are very excited. Today is the last but one day of our global classroom. We have the one next week is the last one. And pretty momentous things are happening in Paris, far away. Yesterday we had Professor Sachs kind of give us a sense of both the challenges and opportunities, which I think most of you were there. So today we are I'm really pleased to welcome Dr. Barbara Samuels from the Global Clearinghouse for Development Finance, where she's the founder and director. She has a clutch of degrees, any one of which would have been a super achievement, but she has a whole clutch of them from MIT. She spent many years actually in the finance world, so she's not a UN policy wonk. She actually has had kind of boots on the ground in finance. And now for the last several years, she's trying to also bring in that sensibility and that passion to development. She is in many kind of UN committees, including the Business Steering Committee. And today we're really pleased to have her speak to us on financing for sustainable development. And I've asked her to kind of cut through, not really kind of talk to us about the importance of SDGs and so on, which she's kindly agreed, but really kind of give us some of the practical insights into financing and how difficult financing is when you have actual kind of investors that would like to invest in development, especially infrastructure, but there are many challenges to kind of realizing that. So Barbara, we'd love to for you to start. She's going to talk for an hour, then we're going to have Google Hangout. And I'm also pleased to welcome Aniket Shah, who's made this possible, and he would actually be taking up the second part of the session, and that's unfortunately for you guys in the global classroom, that's going to be for Columbia University. He comes to us from originally from Goldman Sachs, and then to atone for that, he's worked for several years with Jeff, and now he's with Investec, which is, I think, the largest private investment firm on Africa, out of London. And we're very pleased to have him at the Earth Institute now for the last year and hopefully for the next several months. So thank you, Aniket. And he's going to be taking up the actual discussions in the second session. Barbara?
First of all, it is a huge honor to be here with you here and the people overseas. We talk about the battle on terrorism. I think we need to rephrase that because the terrorist forces that threaten global society are based on a failed development paradigm. And that development paradigm isn't just the developing countries. It's in developed countries, which is why the SDGs and everything we talk about in terms of practical solutions, impact investing, blended finance, you name it, is global in nature. And you guys sitting here, unfortunately, we as the older generation, those with the gray hair, have passed on massive failures to you. I used to teach at SIBA, I think maybe 10 years ago. And it's really exciting. I had the opportunity to talk to a few of you, and of course, overseas I've not. But the compensation of what I would call the development warriors has really changed. It's fascinating to see how diverse and applied, when I spoke to some of you of your interests, that span Syrian refugees, as well as the environment. You know, water and sanitation, as well as energy. So I'm really excited to be talking to you guys, because you guys are really the solution to being able to implement what we need for a better global society. So let me warn you, I have 90 slides. Okay, 90 slides. But I understand that the slides will be made available to all of you. And I'm just going to be a whirlwind here. I see my job as trying to provoke you, inspire you, confuse you a little bit, so you get motivated. Because, you know, the fight that we share together is truly monumental in scope. And it's going to require all of us to challenge our assumptions and to think very concrete about practical, immediate solutions. The world is on fire. We don't have the time to do theories and lots of studies. We have to think about applied solutions. So with that in mind, what I'm going to breeze through is the challenge and the imperative, facts on performance to date. What are the drivers that enable us to mobilize not just private sector capital, but private sector expertise so we have solutions? What are the seeds in institutionalization? If we're going to scale up solutions, we can't just be entrepreneurs, okay? We have to be entrepreneurs that create the frameworks that enable solutions and replication across problems and sectors. And then I'm going to put forward the way forward, talking about specific projects and the like. So on the challenge, I would submit to you that all this rhetoric, it's often called PPPs, which is an incredibly divisive word. I would argue we have to talk about public-private cooperation, but there is no way we are going to successfully confront the issues, the social issues, whether it be climate change, terrorism, failed governments, unless we change the way the public and private sector work together and integrate civil society organizations. There is terrible fragmentation, terrible misunderstandings. And the way that we're going to achieve the SDGs, and again, that's for everybody, all the issues we talk about in terms of creating good societies with good outcomes are across the world, doesn't happen without that private sector engagement. We need to engage the private sector for innovation, for technological change, for getting the water and sanitation deals, for improving standards of living. And finally, our public policies and our regulations, our processes, our bureaucratic processes are killers, absolutely killers. Just people, of course, there's an ideological divide here where many people are deeply suspicious of the private sector. And on the other hand, deeply suspicious of government officials, right? Both in terms of competency and corruption. So there's a huge leap of faith. We can't be ideological, rigid people who discriminate against whole classes of people. You'll meet good and great government people, great civil society people, and great private sector people. But there's this fundamental distrust we need to go across. Now, the challenge has always been there. This is nothing new. But with climate change, we are in a much more forbidding environment. Let's say, for example, you're doing a project in the Bay Area of California on the water, a water and sanitation project. Obviously, you're going to think about where to put that plant that is not subject to rising water. You're going to think, what are the better technologies for you to be as forward and consistent with climate smart needs as possible? Well, it's a little bit easier for you because you're in the middle of the hub of technology, right, and expertise. But take that water and sanitation plant and put it in Dakar. How do those government officials access and know what are the best technologies, the best equipment, the best engineers, the best financing approach? So whereas before, we had a lower threshold, today we have to be much better in globalizing our expertise and being pragmatic and dealing with things. And there's stuff happening out there. You have this whole new focus, both at the UN and elsewhere, on subnational entities. For example, one of the projects we work with under a Rockefeller grant we have now is with Rockefeller 100 Resilient Cities. That includes New York City and Dakar, okay? Because our problems are global. There is a harmony. The world is flat, okay? So now, just some examples of how do you solve these problems. Per the point made before, solutions don't happen in the abstract. They happen at an applied level. So if you can't get a solar project done, whether it be in the US, in Romania, or Uganda, you often have to have feed-in tariffs because the cost of doing a lot of climate smart projects is higher than the old technologies. So, we really, when we think about how can we be good development practitioners, you cannot avoid the need to understand what are the policies as they impact cash flow. Cash flow. I hope you guys are thinking about this in every breath as you aspire to be great development practitioners, because without financial sustainability, you can't deliver improved essential services. Same thing, if you're going to have an impact on government support, on pension fund support, you need to think about how do you set up asset classes. I understand you have a social impact course here at SEPA. Well, you can't have investors in social impact unless you think about the regulatory environment that affects portfolios and how you set up portfolios. You can't think about projects unless you think about what is the incentive and the kinds of processes like auctions and, really hard stuff like geothermal. Oh my God, doing a geothermal deal is incredibly risky. The exploration time, a regular project finance deal in the US, for example, will take 2 to 3 years. In Africa, 10 to 12 years. Geothermal, who knows? So think about the practicalities of where we are. Okay, facts on performance to date. And I love to make this point with my friends at the UN, okay? And also the foundations. The problem is far worse than we realize. Look at the World Bank, which this is only developing countries, but it's indicative of the larger world. If you look at the World Bank Public-Private Infrastructure Database, known as the PPI database, you'll see that in 2012, the total amount of private sector finance in developing country infrastructure was $107 billion. Now, there's all sorts of targets, and it totally intimidates me that my friend Jeff Sachs was speaking yesterday because he's too eloquent, But you look at that gap between all those projections, whether they be 2 trillion, McKinsey I think has 10 trillion for the world, it's nothing, 107 billion. And if you look at the allocations are truly terrifying because they are in the easiest sectors, energy and transport. You know, water and sanitation isn't even there, okay? Social, you know, infrastructure, education, medical facilities, not even counted, okay? And if you look at regional concentrations, and let's take a key terrorist melting pot, Africa, only 2% of that 107 billion goes to Africa. And worse than all of that is what are the number of projects, the average number of projects, okay, is 239. How many projects is that per country? Well, there's a skewing, right? In some attractive, so-called attractive countries. And the size of the projects are incredibly large. The average size was $419 million. So another very important word for development practitioners to seize onto is the missing middle. We are not financing those projects that are put together, which we need, especially for climate smart, that are entrepreneurial project sponsors, civil societies. In Tanzania, who do you think the largest, most successful small project sponsor is in renewable energy? Anybody have a guess? The church. The church. It is mind-boggling. We did work on projects. And you know, those guys, the different church communities, they get projects done with zero government help. And then the government walks in, the head of the renewable energy and agency, and cuts the red tape. Okay? So, you know, we have a real missing middle issue, and we have to think about how we reorient all this tangled policies and architecture, whether it be in Europe, the US, Asia, or Africa, how we really support the local stakeholders that we need to make things work. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead here because I'm taking way too much time. Okay, now, what are the seeds of hope? I'm aware that I sound a little bit pessimistic, but ultimately, we have the foundations for solutions because there are underlying drivers. It isn't happening that the private sector wants to be altruistic. That's impossible, okay? Because of the fundamental drivers of shareholder value and pressure affecting that, okay? So, but we have urgent needs. So the fact that you have so much buzz in the business community on social impact or corporate social responsibility or the like is because the markets are mature in developed countries. And so there's a rush to be able to somehow seek the higher yields in emerging markets, as well as in the underserved areas of the developed countries. So this is extraordinarily important. And I think there's more social you know, a lot of the business community, as you know, is driven by high net worth individuals with huge foundations. For example, we've been collaborating a lot with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. You know, so there is a better understanding of leaders in the business community. There's a lot of foundations, for example, in developing countries. We need to be able to work with that. And the public sector just doesn't have the money. I mean, we've had people in civil society at the UN say, hey, no private sector. We're going to do all these essential public services on our own. Good luck. It's not going to work. So that might be your ideology, but there is no practical implementation strategy to get the work done without that. Plus, it is a total criminal act of putting public resources at risk if you haven't satisfied the requirements for financial sustainability. Doesn't make any difference if your capital is public or private. The same discipline needs to be there. You need to make sure that somehow you can keep your water and sanitation plant or your school or whatever it is operating over the longer term for your targeted beneficiaries, right? So it's an overlap, a total overlap. And the really cool thing is we have new solutions that are coming from technology. We have new business models blended. Some of them are old but enhanced, where we can actually make these projects work and have a sustainable public-private, I won't say PPP, but working together. You can have a project that is 100% owned by the public sector, but it gets 100% of its funding from the private sector, often with some grant or reimbursable funds from the national government or the like. But these are the ways, the new models to actually deliver services, public-private sector cooperation. Technology, of course, is a game changer. You guys, above all, should see the power of how technology is changing the way we deliver services. Take one example. A key way, a key impediment to delivering water and sanitation, energy, whatever it is risk of payment, because people may not have the resources of paying. Well, we know that cell phones have been disseminated to the bottom of the pyramid, to the poorest communities in developed countries. Well, how do they do that? Prepayment cards, right? Well, that same payment model is being expanded for energy, water, and sanitation. So we need to have young blood helping us really hash out cash flow. How do you really increase the certainty of cash flow so you have these great sustainable projects that can deliver services? And another key point, performance tracking. We need to have accountability. If services, have you guys heard about, for example, students in, it's notorious in Africa, where the teachers don't show up? Well, there's an app for students to report, the teacher isn't here, the teacher isn't here. Why can't we do more of that kind of stuff to build more discipline into the system? So we need young, motivated, young blood, inspired development practitioners to really help us figure out at the deal level how we're going to be able to solve those issues. I'm not going to talk about the ESGs. Let me just briefly say we have a lot of examples of what you could coin the seeds of change by sector, where you see models that we need to think about. So you can have the Gavi, right, with health. How do you get pharmaceutical companies to really care about delivering cheap mass solutions? MasterCard, one of the biggest foundations is the MasterCard Foundation, $9 billion. And of course, this shows the underlying private sector drivers. They're there giving lots of money for inclusive finance because it's their future customers. So being able to see how that works. Green bonds. I talked with somebody here from Tamil Nadu. We have new finance structures. Impact bonds. I know a lot of people are very interested in this, but this has not been going very well. So, we need a lot of energy to think about how we can make this more scalable. A big issue, and I talked to someone before the class, is refugees. How do you integrate refugees? And related to that, the larger topic perhaps is how do you source for employment? A dear friend of mine who was one of Obama's key people did a VC venture for training of programmers in Nigeria, okay? They raised over $10 million to train young Nigerian students so they could be outsourced to the larger community. It's interesting. Could Syrian refugees be retrained in part of an expanded kind of Peace Corps concept? The best solutions to improving capabilities on the ground, of course, are people from those areas. So, being able to think through practical ways that we can actually train people for solutions. Institutionalization. Okay. I actually presented this slide before Annika and I were at the UN Financing for Development Conference in Addis in July. Financing for Development, as many of you might know, is supposed to provide the financing framework for actually implementing the SDGs worldwide. And I must say, I am disappointed. But within that framework, you have so-called initiatives that are supposed to be addressing the need to have better incentives and processes for getting deals done. Because there's a recognition you can't meet the SDG goals, education, water, energy, whatever it is, without actually going to the project level. So not only do you have the SDGs, which have accountable indicators, but you have TOASTI, which is a new system being debated and put forward by the OECD DAC, the Development Assistance Committee, which is supposed to, and we actually put forward the first initiative in Doha with Reuters. Some of you might know of project league tables, Reuters. If you want to know who did the most energy financing in the world, you go to Reuters Energy Project League Table. And that's a big deal on Wall Street or any place in the world because, you know, you want to be the top of the league table, right? It's like the Emmys. You know, this is how humans work. You know, you want to get stars like you guys, you want to get stars from your professor. Well, in the project finance world, you want to be at the top of the energy project league tables if you're in project finance. Well, in Doha 2008, Global Clearinghouse and Reuters launched the project league tables for development finance institutions, which basically said, what deals were done by the DFIs? How much private sector was capital? What did they do to mobilize that in terms of risk mitigation? And what was their leverage ratio? So you could see all the deals that were done, and then you could see who was the most effective. You know, $1 of public sector money, did you mobilize $10 for that $1 in the private sector? I mean, this is how you get deals done, is leverage, right? Now, I'm sorry to say, Reuters still does that project league table. They changed it in ways that I think need to be revised. But if you look at it, you'll see what we talked about before in the World Bank PPI database. Deals aren't getting done. So if you guys and policymakers, they often want to argue they're getting deals done, but the pipeline is like, so, you know, we need to really work. And so TOASTI could potentially be a very important force because those are the guys that rate the development finance institutions, whether it be USAID, Swedish SIDA, the World Bank, the African, everybody. So, but I'm not sure where that's going to go because of all the political issues. You have this movement of institutionalization. There's this new initiative under OECD, SDIP, co-chaired by the World Economic Forum and OECD, that's supposed to take $100 billion of private sector capital and working on a deal-by-deal basis, get projects done. That has not made much progress. There is another initiative by the Canadian government now called Convergence that also has not made much progress. So, you know, we have attempts and recognition, but I'm sorry to say, I don't see the issues, the success. Indices are very important to push on. How do people invest? You want to invest in climate smart stuff. You want to invest in improving education. Getting indices, that's how the market works. So if you're interested in that, it's something for you to really try to learn, to do internships, to work in, whatever. Okay, the way forward. Okay, so based on my life's work in development finance, both in the private sector and in the public sector, I would say we have 5 key challenges. Okay, so I'll go through them quickly one by one. One is what we referred to before. There are some overlapping drivers between the public and private sector. But as mentioned, there's a fundamental disconnect between the public and private sector. And let me add to that, the silos are not just in between the public and private sector. There's all these mini silos within each. For example, I was just in Bellagio at a Rockefeller meeting. I'm putting together an African Center on Law and Finance. It was run by lawyers. And the whole time I was waving my hand saying, guys, where's the finance? You know, because in their world, World Bank, you know, they don't understand what's needed to get deals done. You know, at a Gates meeting in London on a health fund, the Gates is doing with Abraj. It was really interesting to see Abraj say, oh, we don't think first loss facilities are important. It was like, whoever told you that? First loss is you go do a deal. Who gets hit first? You want your development partner to get hit first. It's a lot easier to go to a pension fund and say, you're safe because Swedish CETA is going to take the first $100 million if this fails. That's really important. But, you know, different private sector entities have different experiences. So, you know, being able to have a safe space where we respect each other and we work on solutions across disciplines, like it's a deal team, you know, and it's the same thing on a policy level, is extraordinarily important. I mean, often, for example, government officials, but most importantly, civil society will say, oh, you're just subsidizing the private sector. I mean, the answer is clear. Deals aren't getting done. So if you don't want to subsidize and help getting a deal done, then deals won't get done, because you can't expect private sector to invest in projects that are such high risk that their shareholders are going to fire them, right? So there's a conflict at an ideological level. You know, the point of changing mentality and how we measure performance is also very important. If we have a lot of investors, for example, a key guy managing high net worth individuals at HSBC said, hey, I got 5%, billions of dollars sitting in our bank, where our high net worth individuals and family offices want to invest in high risk social impact projects. Give me product. This is what is so criminal. There is money sitting there that need good bankable structures, okay? They're willing to take risk, but they need to have structures and products. We are failing collectively in producing the product for that new aware set of investors that wants to make a difference. So this is something we need you guys to help us with. Action 2. Very much related. We got to change our mindset to coordinate at the transaction level. And we have to do it in a way that empowers the project sponsor. Every transaction has a project sponsor. It can be a local government, it can be a church, it can be a ministry of agriculture, it can be an SME, it can be an international company. But you need to organize your universe and your inputs around the project sponsor. But we are supply driven, totally supply driven. Try working on the ground with projects. And you have all of these. For example, we designed and implemented the local finance initiative in Uganda and Tanzania. It is totally dysfunctional. I don't care whether you're the Aga Khan guys, the IPS, or you're, you know, working with this wonderful young, happens to be female entrepreneur. You know, it is impossible to work with development banks and development partners, even with us providing free financial advisory, being the Wall Street guys, doing the interface, the transaction times, the complexity of the processes. Donors compete with one another. They don't relate. It is extraordinarily difficult. So we really need to think about, how do we empower the project sponsor to get things done? Just like we have the common app for colleges, why can't we have a common app for project development services? If a project sponsor needs to have experts, engineers, lawyers, to be able to help them, why can't they have a free access to a roster of experts? No. Today you have to go through UNDP. You have to go through the World Bank. We have to totally change our thinking upside down and empower. I got 15 minutes? Okay. Okay. Third action. Related. Oh, it means I'm doing okay? We have to build project pipelines. And there's another kind of airy-fairy thing that goes on out there. For example, we sponsored a side event at Addis with the Gates Foundation, Swedish SIDA, and because we believe in localization, an African firm, African investor, and we had a country from the South, Mexico. And it was interesting. Swedish SIDA had the former head of the Swedish pension funds come to talk. And so much of the persona, including at the famous blended finance, FSDP convergence event in Addis, is about mobilizing international pension funds. Wrong. That is a pipe dream. What good finance 101 means you're mobilizing domestic finance, whether that be bank finance, pension funds, you know, equity on the stock market. Why? Foreign exchange risk. You know, you cannot, if you want a pension fund to invest, you have to meet very high investment grade criteria. There is no way to mitigate currency risk cross-border in developing, high-risk developing countries. Swedish SIDA, for example, with their local government funding agency can do that. And I think over the last few years, it's $10 billion. You look at how governments in Europe finance their infrastructure, it's through bonds that are bought by investors, both domestic and international. But if you can hedge, that's fine. So, you know, it's really important as to understand that there is a keef-keef, one-to-one relationship between if you're generating revenues in local currency, your debt needs to be denominated in local currency. And even though, you know, there's again in this silo approach, we talk value added, we talk supply chains, but we forget that it's all related. So you have, for example, the USAID agricultural program, Feed the Future, and you have huge millions of dollars going to build farmer organizations. But who's building the agricultural processing plants that are needed for local value added? It's a gap. And it's a gap where we can use hardcore project finance approaches to solve that. So, you know, we need to be able to look at domestic capital and also, you know, what is a country's global comparative advantage? What are the respective in each sector? You know, very much Michael Porter, you know, the value chains that you create, the local markets, the demand for service, all this kind of good stuff. Action 4, we talked about it briefly. We gotta be able to look at the double missing middle, okay? In the development architecture, the first missing middle is we lack the indigenous skill set. Where are all those professionals that we need to identify, first of all, to help articulate, formulate development planning, capital investment planning, you know, where are the right projects and how. But also do the nuts and bolts. You have to build the foundation. You don't have a water and sanitation plant unless you're able to know the right technologies, have the right engineers, be able to create with a good lawyer a special purpose vehicle, to look at cash flows and have ring-fenced revenues, to be able to do the environmental assessment. You need to be able to, in many cases, doing a deal will catalyze the needed changes. And then the second one is actually at the project level. You know, we all talk climate smart. Most of those projects are small, okay? They're very small because we're decentralizing. If you're doing solar, it's probably under $50 million. That's missing middle. high transaction costs, you really need a lot of support to be able to do those things. So if you don't have local professionals that are helping you in that, you're dead in the water. You know, deals are already impossible to do, but bringing in international consultants, kiss of death. Too expensive. They don't know the local framework. They don't have the local contacts. You're not going to get your deals done. Action 5, we talked about it briefly. Subnational entities. This, in fact, I've found myself working a lot on that. Right now, we're working with the World Bank and the City Creditworthiness Initiative. You know, if you're going to expect to have local services, where does most of the world's population get its services? From its city, the village, the state, the province, the district, the county. So this is for the political scientists in you. This is a very important political issue because it is a power problem. For the first time in the UN Financing for Development process, we have a paragraph that talks about the importance of local governments. But to get them represented at FFD, we had to invite them to our business committee. Think about that. You know, if you want to do a deal, you know, for example, right now, there's one information maybe with Joburg on providing municipal finance, using this pooled finance for the poorer cities around it. You know, in order to do that deal, you got to convince your local ministry at the national level, the Ministry of Finance, that it's okay. That's a really hard discussion. So we need to really think about helping subnational entities build their capacity so they can actually deliver services. And again, this concept is important. So examples. 10 minutes? Okay. Example, I'm going to quickly talk about the importance of infrastructure finance, project finance. I bet you there isn't a course on project finance. I wonder if there's even one in the business school. You know, it's an academic shortcoming. You know, for example, I did a survey when I was at this Bellagio thing quickly online, and I checked Harvard Law, Harvard Business, and the Kennedy School. And between them, I think they had one course, I think, yeah, but you know, we're failing in the academic world in providing the courses that you guys need to be out there and actually do the applied practice that's needed. So that would be a challenge I would ask our friends at SEPA. We need to have that. And quickly give examples of projects. I think you might be surprised with the applications of how project finance can be used, and subnational showing public developed and developing country, and then what we're trying to revolutionize, which is an upside down approach that we're trying. So I don't know what you guys have done on infrastructure, but this is a key focus to deliver on development. You see it in the US, you know, the infrastructure bank and you know, we need to focus on infrastructure, but we need to understand that it includes social services as well as agricultural processing. It also includes things like markets. It's called industrial infrastructure in the latter case, you know, and we need to understand that infrastructure is needed for competitiveness, for providing people with good living standards. You can't expect people to be able to survive and build their livelihoods if they don't have electricity or affordable electricity or a place to get to market. And there's huge barriers now that we need to break apart. You know, especially with the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements, new Basel III, maybe some of you have looked at it, but there's actually higher risk for doing infrastructure finance. And it's getting worse because of that. Now, you know, there are good reasons for banks to have lots of reserves to cover risk, but perhaps the unintended impact is we have more of a squeeze than we had before. So we're going to have to be more innovative in thinking about how to deal with the reduction of bank finance. The banks, a lot of banks don't have the internal skills to do infrastructure and project finance. Now, there is kind of a public policy visceral reaction of saying, we're not going to help the banks. Well, sorry, you know, it's like, how do you start a market? Who started the internet? It started with public funding. We got to figure out how to train the banks and get them motivated to do more of this project finance, because that's the only way you get infrastructure done any place in the world. And you have a chicken and egg issue. In a lot of countries, banks, all they want to do is give you a loan if you give 200% collateral or 150% collateral. That doesn't work. You can't get a project done on those terms. We talked about the labor intensity of getting these deals done, the high cost of professional, blah, blah, blah. So what are the keys? And it's very simple. These are universal principles worldwide of how you deliver on infrastructure deals. You put together a special purpose vehicle, SPV. You ring fence the revenues. I mean, even New York City does that, okay? And it's amazing how many people think, when they think you're going to do essential public services, you're going to do on balance sheet lending. That's extraordinarily rare. If you're a pension fund, you're a bank, you want to know, you want to be able to see the cash flows that are going to service the debt, right? That's your fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders, to your retirees. So if you have a separate legal entity that doesn't have any of the liabilities of the project sponsor, but it is set up with good governance, good technical skills, and you can see the expenses, the startup expenses, the maintenance expenses, and the cash flows. And those are supported by expert technical studies that says, yeah, they know how to build the plant. They know how to run the plant. Their estimates of their inputs, their costs is correct. Their estimate of market demand, of how much users are going to pay. And blended finance, where there is a viability gap, you need to know that whether it's a national government, a development partner, a foundation, that viability gap is covered. And risk mitigation is very important. Very often, it could be an SME, it could be a church, it could be a government. You're going to be worried about their willingness and ability to pay. So you might need a partial credit guarantee from the national government, from USAID, from the US government, if it's local or whatever. But you know, you need to be able to actually implement a good deal. So this is the kind of stuff you guys should live by. How do you structure a project? So you see in the middle, you've got the SPV. It's very legal, right? You want to make sure that someone's buying your services. So the easiest deal is if you have an offtake agreement, right? Output purchaser. For example, this could be a utility that says, yeah, you're producing energy. We're going to buy 100% of all the energy you produce at this price. This is how we're going to pay you year to year, how we're going to adjust. That's tight. You know that. And on the other hand, you want to see that you have really well executed legal contracts with the vendors that are actually doing your construction, that are providing you with the equipment. So again, you want it very much. So there's a lot of stuff here on sequencing of project finance you could look at on your own. So just a few applications. Tanzania. It's a country where 80% of the population doesn't have access to energy. Think about that. 80%. And by the way, there are guerrilla camps for terrorists that are growing. This is the seeds of a tomorrow none of us want. So even though this is one of the biggest donor-banked countries in the world, You have over 20 donors on the energy development working group. We have a backlog of small renewable projects we just can't get done. Can't get done because we are not effective at the ground level. Uganda applications. One really cool project we spent over 2 years with that's still not done. A farmer cooperative of 30,000 milk farmers to build a milk processing facility. Tough deal. But the problems on the ground of working with a very weak project sponsor, very disconnected, dysfunctional development partners, not enough money. I mean, it's just, it's a nightmare. Okay. You can see the descriptions of these projects here. Subnational finance, the big, and I need to start closing down here, but a big headline I think that we should draw confidence and inspiration from is there is a track record of getting deals done with good private sector capital and expertise that perform, that meet the needs of the population since 1898. What happened in 1898? The Danish local government funding agency was set up. Okay? And in fact, this is all the rage. There is a new in France, Agence Locale de France. There is a new one in the UK. There's all these, this is what works, guys. So if you really want to do essential services and improve the world and all this stuff, we have a whole history of deal structures that we can look at. And one strange, how many of you see Narcos? That's in Medellin, right? Well, they have one of the most successful state-owned companies in the world. And it started back in the narco days. And again, it's because they set up an SPV, they ring-fenced revenues, okay? They now have 44 companies because it's technically, it doesn't make any difference if it's owned by the public sector or private sector, they get the job done. Sabespi in Sao Paulo, it is listed on the New York Stock Exchange. It is now $4 billion capitalization. It's the largest state-owned, they're 51% state-owned. I mean, we have lots of incredible inspirational stories here, okay? Manila Water. In the US, over the last 25 years, under the US Water Act, we have gotten done 30,000 water and sanitation projects, mobilizing $100 billion. Okay, this is nothing new. But we have failed in embedding these principles, these models, and training people to be able to create these deal structures to solve our issues. And you have others there. So finally, if I could close with, we have a non-for-profit 501c3. What are we trying to do? And mobilize support from, it's very hard. It's basically to say, listen, guys, you have a lot of supply-driven stuff up here. What we need is to turn the paradigm upside down and create local marketplaces, local capacity to be able to identify, develop, and finance deals. So you see here sort of our approach. We're also very much into using online tools to be able to scale up training. I'd love to learn more about how your program works with the other universities. I applaud that, would love to figure out. Being able to give both public and private sector entities roadmaps, fillable, sort of PDFs. How do you do a financial model? How do you do a business plan? How do you do a technical study? Why do we all have to reinvent the wheel here? These are global public goods. We need to build factories, machines that go from beginning to end. So I think I've used up my time, but it's really a pleasure to see you guys, and I hope that sort of provokes you to move forward in your work. Thank you.
Oh, please.
Okay, there you go. And you could read out the question, and then you can select it. There will be a whole list of questions coming up. So the thing to do is to select, and then when you're done answering the question, you press done. It's easy.
I can also do it.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I prefer because okay. So do I start with the first one?
Sure.
The
And
blue.
yeah.
Okay.
you could pick and choose.
No, you pick and choose.
No,
You're the professor.
No, you should be able to answer them.
Who knows? Okay, I'll just go in order because I don't want to bias the selection. The first question is, quote, could the current emphasis on public-private partnerships hurt sectors that are truly public goods such as healthcare or education? Yes, of course. Okay, you have to be extraordinarily careful in aligning the objectives between public and private sector. And, there are infinite risks, including with the public sector. I mean, I don't see it as black or white. I mean, we have lots of public sector owned and run institutions that are totally incompetent, that are totally corrupt, and not user-oriented or dynamic. We also have totally the same problem with the private sector. So I think the challenge that we all face, whether we're in the public sector, the private sector, or civil society, is about how to create technical solutions that provide the right incentives that are totally based on delivery service. And there, I think if we could stretch our operating machinery and frameworks to start with, what are the objectives of the service? What are the performance indicators? Making sure you have primary data sources. Let's not have any, bullshit with people interpreting, consultants interpreting. You need to have primary indications from the targeted beneficiaries, whether the services are working or not. And so what we need to do is to build this hybrid set of warriors, of soldiers that can really arm us in figuring out how to have these templates and applications. I don't know. Is there any? Okay. So next question. Okay. If the political principle that drives government's efficiency is conformity, how can we promote a more conscious thinking on social interests from each individual? Let me try to restate that, and I hope to the person asking the question, I haven't lost their intended meaning. Let me first contest. I don't think an approach to inefficiency is conformity. I think an approach to inefficiency is being focused on your client, period. Okay? And, it is true that when we think about standardized processes, that they have to be adapted to the existing operating processes and incentives in an environment. A colossal, well-known failure in public policy and development is just to import frameworks. If you have not anchored your operations and your policies to the local environment, you're just going to reside somewhere up here. You're not going to have the intended impact. So if I read that you need to always localize and anchor. And on social interests from each individual, this world isn't going to be worth living in if each individual doesn't take ownership, okay? We are compelled as individuals to care and to act and to collaborate. So anything we do in any approach, I think, has to be very geared on engaging local stakeholders across all sectors, all people, and be extraordinarily inclusive in a way that is not today. Next question. Policy on remitting corporate profit is one of the biggest hurdles for outside penetration to some we have some, maybe someone from Ethiopia, to some developing countries like Ethiopia. How do you see governments in these countries protecting national interest while at the same time attracting investment? Well, this is a classical, even when I was doing my PhD, we talked about things like this. One of the development models we talk a lot about today is engaging local investors in a deal structure. And that's potentially both on debt and equity sides. So what does that mean? And I think the question is, listen, you don't want, an international company just to come in and repatriate all the profit and, what's left in the country. Now, I used to run country risk for Chase Manhattan Bank, okay? So my whole way, including my dissertation, was all about how do you have that integrated local, global relationship at the deal, at the business basis. You got to do that. Other words, it is a political risk. This isn't just a public policy issue. You shouldn't be doing deals if you want to make money in ways that don't contribute to your local country and the different stakeholders in that country. You are not smart as a business person. So I think in practical terms, anytime you do a transaction, in Ethiopia, for example, it's an amazing market. I mean, and it's a very exciting one because of the huge population. So it's very important to be thinking about how do you train the local citizens to participate in different parts of your project? How do you engage local investors? The equity side, it can be pension funds, but it can also be the local stock market. And that is, from an international investor point of view, the best risk mitigation in town. You're less likely to have local people and the government do something that is going to impact cash flows if it also impacts them. So again, I think the answer is technical roadmaps of how we work together. Let's stop the ideology and just put together case studies of what works and give people the frameworks for getting the deals done. Is this what you want? Okay. How does the private sector authentically, in quotes, authentically determine their social responsibility? To ensure real needs are being addressed, is it through community service, focus groups, etc.? Okay. I love the word authentically in quotes because a lot of social responsibility is bullshit, okay? It is dressing, but you have to understand the nature of the beast via the incentive structure of the corporate structure, right? So I think the question is totally right. There's a lot of social responsibility groups and a bunch of metrics that try to address these issues. And I think what we need to do via these this growing myriad of forces is to make sure the metrics. Look at the, for example, Global Compact at the UN. There's a lot of principles, but are they measured? It's a real problem of the theory of social change, because if you're an activist and you want to change behavior, you're more likely to be able to work with a corporation if you're not too tough, right? If you don't actually have these authentic, metrics. So I would argue that, and that's why actually we started the Global Clearinghouse, is that we have this analytical hole between vested interests, both political and business. And it affects analytics, information, implementation. So we need to figure out how to have more funding, independent funding, to protect those that will actually try to incentivize through these the surveys, the focus groups, and a lot. Transparency. Using the internet. Look at how God forbid, look at our US presidential campaign. But, we need to have as much transparency, like fact checker kind of thing. I really believe we don't use media very well in trying to, because that will change corporate behavior and force those that say they want to be corporate responsible, to actually act the talk. Okay, next question. Can corporate Africa afford investing in SDGs? Not the multilateral companies that are based there, but national companies that are 100% owned and run by locals. How can SDGs be promoted to African companies in order to gain their involvement? What university do you have in Africa? Oh, cool. Okay. Well, that's great. Guys, I'd love to learn more about where you're studying and what you're doing. My email is in the PowerPoint. It's interesting. The SDGs is about delivering to people, okay? So I think it's always that point of alignment. We don't want to be bureaucratic. I mean, I can't recite to you like the Bible of the SDGs, but every African country that are 100% owned and run by locals, they should care about being responsive to the needs of their communities. And the critical point here is that's just not short term. If you put together, let's say you're doing a biogas or a solar plant or whatever, if you're just thinking, and it's also not smart for you, if you're thinking you're going to deliver just over 5 years, that's not going to make your bank happy, you as an equity investor happy, or anybody. So to me, I preach convergence. We should not be bureaucratically defined. And very often you have, development finance institutions and development partners put requirements on all deals, whether they be local deals or international deals, that aren't good for the project because of their own home constituency. Like we worked on a deal where Danita, the Danish, this is the milk deal, said to the farmers, if you want us to give you this concessional financing, you buy glass milk bottles from our company. But nobody in the marketplace buys glass milk bottles. So, here's the little project sponsor, 30,000 farmers, but they're intimidated. They have the big, and we're like, hey, don't listen to them. You need to have, it's a big problem. You need to have independent advisory with no vested interest. You got to do what's right for the project, what's right for the people. And that's, part of, I think, the challenge of working together for these technical frameworks. And I think, and if you talk to the African Union, they'll say Africa 2063. What are the SDGs? Everything needs to be localized. So next, I hope that answers you. Okay, next question. In your experience, what are some of the principal strategies and practices to build trust between the public and private sector? Whoa. Now, that's tough. I think the best experience is getting a deal done. It's the most. And so, I think if we could scale leading edge transactions, and if you go to infradev.org, we've started that, but we need funding to build it out. How do you get a deal done? It's just like many of you, I'm sure, are incredulous, saying, what is she saying, these projects done with the private sector? But the evidence, we need to use evidence-based models to be able to build on. And I think we need to couple that with testimonials, so because, it's too dry just looking at a deal structure. You need, and there's controversy. I had a little debate with a very senior World Bank guy at this Bellagio thing last week in Italy over the Tamil Nadu pooled water sanitation. Because everybody I talked to says, hey, it was great for the community. It's like a leading edge transaction. He's like, no. The local Tamil Nadu banks are mad because they're crowded out of the market of lending to municipalities. Well, I'd like to get some of the, experts don't always agree, some of the experts in the room and really debate that, because classically, you're much better off with a long-term low-interest bond than you are with a bank because of asset liability management that is going to lend shorter term at higher interest rates. But, you know, this guy, leading expert, is not a banker, but he knows, and he is going to impose that policy on whatever government he talks to. It has an impact. So I really don't think we're good about filtering, you know, these principal strategies. There's, you know, it's like I led this World Economic Forum for 2 years on how to work with the DFIs. And the former VP of the World Bank, Eugene Rotberg, raised his hand. He said, well, you know, Barbara, you think anybody at the World Bank really trusts the private sector? You know, that's a reality. That's a reality. So, you know, we need to do deals. We need to filter out the issues on the deals. And again, I think it needs to be done transparently. And, you know, no UN protocol here. We got to be honest. We got to seize onto the facts. And some people, most people, are very uncomfortable with debate and confrontation. But you've got to swear to yourself you're going to speak truth to power, ask the hard questions. That's what it takes, right? Okay. Do you want more? Do I keep going? Okay. How appropriate is it for the private sector to see in the SDGs a new business venture? Hey, to me, that's protocol. I don't care if it's appropriate or not. To me, I'm always in the sale mode. You know, we're not going to get it done unless somehow we can sell. And you know, frankly, I don't care why they're there as long as they do the right thing. Okay. So, and there's going to be a lot of people that you're not going to like, whether it be in the private sector or the public sector. That's not what it's about. If you really care about delivering public services and making the world a better place, you better give that up quick. It's tough. But this is not a, you know, a campaign for someone to like you or to give you stars or anything else. We have to care about delivering to the targeted beneficiaries. And it's really important. We don't have the incentives in place in most jobs to do that. But, you know, I take it by you investing in doing this degree, that's who you want to be. You know, so, and, you know, for example, Hans Schultz, head of the private sector at the Inter-American Development Bank, got up at a Latin America infrastructure conference and gave the keynote. And he goes, sustainability is big business. That's terrific. If you look at 100 resilient cities, the Rockefeller Initiative, Microsoft has given pro bono $1 million of free services to the cities. And there's a whole host of others, architecture firms. Hey, get what you can. You know, be a hustler. You know, that's the way you get things done. It's a really important thing. And I see there's a very high proportion of women here. We were brought up to have to figure out how to move things, right? So we've got natural abilities, I would like to think. Okay. Okay. Given the political and economic instability of some countries, especially those in Latin America, how can we create trust in order to obtain foreign investment? Is it only the responsibility of those countries, or should investment also be more risky? That's an interesting question. Again, I wish I could probe a little bit, but I mean, Latin America, of course, has done very well relative to places like Africa in mobilizing foreign investment. But there's an implicit assumption here in the question, should investment also be more risky? A lot of times people think, well, you know, you tell investors to invest or do this or that, and they have the freedom to do that. If you work with the decision makers in companies, small companies or large companies, and especially the large companies, there's very little latitude. You can't say, I love Honduras. You know, I'm going to put a $10 million plant to do textiles in Honduras, okay? I mean, if you do that, you are fired. You know, you have a whole set of regulators and rating agencies and shareholders that are pounding you on the analytics. And if it doesn't work, it's very interesting. I used to spend a lot of time giving speeches to fund managers, institutional investors. And, it was always so irritating because they have to move as a crowd, because if it doesn't make any difference if they screw up, as long as they screw up together. So, when people like me, talk about the systemic issues and what you need to do and blah, 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 they don't care. It's like, go to the door, Barbara. You're not relevant. In order to understand the determinants of investment decisions, you have to look, it's very simple, at what people are being measured, promoted by, and fired by. Okay. I mean, there are some, funny individuals. I remember my husband in heading Booz Allen's telecom practice. He teaches at the business school here. He did the auction for bandwidth in Sao Paulo. And he has got a great case study about how some individual factors played into what in the end was a bad decision by one of the bidding companies. So you do have individuals that can tweak things sometimes and make a difference, but in the larger configuration of forces of what drives decision-making and investment, it's really the obligation of all of us to work together on the strategies that make sense. So I would reorient the question is to what are the deals that make sense to the country, make sense to domestic investors and to foreign investors that are going to yield the defined outputs. Another one? Okay. And I was bad. Instability of countries. Hey, look at Argentina. My husband is Argentine. Look at Brazil. I mean, when you look at an investment decision, okay, you need to stress test the actual changes in the overall factors that are going to impact your cash flow. Again, it's cash flow. It's amazing how many deals you can get done, even in the most so-called unstable countries, and still do well. So, we shouldn't be like astrology and say, oh, this country is highly, rated as blah, blah, blah. No, your job in putting together a deal, whatever it is understanding how you insulate your deal, its ability to provide services, and those cash flows against that range of projected scenarios. Okay, next question. In your presentation, you singled out geothermal energy as particularly challenging venture to get an agreement for. What makes it unique and what solutions do you see to allow this renewable source of energy to become more viable in developing countries? I wonder if that's from someone in the Lake Victoria area. That's you? And Zambia. Okay. I'm not a geothermal expert, but we have worked or tried to work with some geothermal sponsors, successful ones that wanted to work in East Africa. Again, what I would argue is we need to put together these templates and investment roadmaps, but on a sector basis. For geothermal, my understanding, actually we did work on Polaris in Nicaragua, as I think about it, is being able to cover exploration risk. That requires extraordinarily deep pockets. And I remember sitting with a big cigar smoking Canadian investor who, was, trying to sell, we're going to get this done and blah, blah, blah. And he had spent like 3 years going down, and then all of a sudden everything blew up and he was at 0.1 again. I mean, very tough. It's interesting. There are some risk mitigation products that are being developed. For example, there was the head of a tribe. This was in Uganda. The first problem with a lot of these deals is who owns the land. So this is the head of something or other for the prince of the tribe, right? And he says, Barbara, we've got some land that we could do geothermal. Can you help us? Well, 5 Skypes later, it ends up, it's not their land. The land belonged to the tribe. It now is a federal park, but because the national government recognizes the historical relationship of the tribe to the land, they have given it a signed PPA, purchase power agreement, with exclusive right to develop, blah, blah, blah. Then, and this is why we need to have a global public good. He said, Willis Insurance Company has come to us and they have a product, an insurance product, to help cover exploration risk. Now, again, we need to create some analytical sweat and effort to really look into this. Willis is all over the place. For example, Aniket and FFD, and they participated in a lot of our stuff. But, and this is where I got to emphasize, again, the power of the private sector. Very often, if you want to get risk mitigation, your best answer is going to Lloyd's or Willis or one of these guys, not to, certainly not to USXM, right? Or, OPIC or USAID or the World Bank or whatever. So, getting that risk mitigation. But, it's very hard. Like the World Bank has a global geothermal facility they put together. And there was the former CFO of OPIC working as a CFO of a geothermal firm that applied and didn't get it. Okay? This is before when we talked about how difficult it is. There are funds to support different, especially climate smart stuff like geothermal here. But the process of actually, the cost of making those applications and the lack of transparency, often when you are refused, whether it's a small little deal in a Uganda or a big deal like this, nobody really tells you why. So that's why I think, being able to have more of a demand-oriented process is one that it's an imperative. We've got to have it done. Okay.
Thank you very much,
Okay.
Barbara.
Yes.
This has been wonderful. Thank you, Barbara, for a really fantastic, very clear-eyed and honest look at what ails development finance, how there is investment that need to be kind of ring-fenced for risk. That on the demand side is where primarily we have failed across the board in developing and developed countries. And then there are all these ephemeral, loosey-goosey saying there is billions of dollars out there. We need to kind of somehow get them to kind of use that. Ideologies coming into play, saying, no, don't deal with the public sector or with the private sector. But how a very kind of clear-eyed look is what is needed. And your call, I think, especially for the MDP network, about having a whole kind of series of very practical kind of teaching efforts, modules in training in very practical ways. How do you put together deals, sector-wise, region-wise, kind of pure or blended? I think that's extremely important. And I hope some of the MDP faculty in this network take that to heart, and maybe collectively we can put together, maybe working with your group.
We'd love to do that. We'd
So
love to.
that would be
I'm
really
gonna shake your hand on that.
okay. Lovely.
I believe in deals.
Okay.
Okay, guys, you got to hold them. You're the marketplace, so you put the demand in place.
Okay, now this would be terrific. So thank you again, guys. You can go off for your tea or less kosher stuff, whatever gets you going. All right. Okay. Goodbye and good luck.